From the dawn of time, for the human species at least, we've recognized that our minds and our memories are limited, so we need tools for thinking with. We imagine somehow that computers are a modern invention. If you think about the origin of that word, computer, Latin, com, with, putara, to reckon. It's just something to reckon with, something to think with. A cave painting is a computer. A painting in an art gallery is a computer. A drawing in the sand on the beach is a computer. And I'm going to be using some old-fashioned computers today, some artifacts to help explain some of the basic principles of this new discipline we call human learning ecology, which is what I've been working on for about 4 decades. Human learning ecology is a process of mapping out the dynamics of adaptive intelligence in human systems. What does human systems mean? It's the linkage between individuals, primary groups, organizations, societies, and civilizations. One of the constraining factors on human development, and one of the reasons why Humanity 3.0 was very late in emerging, is that we tend to think of learning in very limited ways if we think about it at all. So we focus on individuals, and we don't recognize that what an individual can learn is going to be directly linked to what a civilization can learn. At one point in his life, Albert Schweitzer was asked what he had learned through his life, and his response was something I always remember: I'm more interested in what civilization has learned. And the problem is that we keep our views of life, of humanity, so parochial that we actually don't see most of the forces that actually shape our time and place in history. We're being swept along by currents much larger than 40-year cycles. There are deeper cycles in play that go back, in some cases, for thousands of years, and some processes that were opened up at least 2,000 years ago that we haven't yet drawn to any kind of an effective conclusion. We've learned things, embedded them into our culture, but we have not yet learned how to apply them. So I'm going to give you just a really quick, simple introduction to some aspects of human learning ecology that might be helpful when you're thinking about Humanity 3.0. When people ask, sometimes, they see me reading the books that we read, and there are a lot of them, if you're drawing on the combined record of humanity's striving, achievement, and failure across cultures, across disciplines, across periods of history, you're reading a lot of stuff. And you're connecting with a much bigger story than what you would ordinarily be concerned with. If you think about getting people in the room and the wisdom in the room, if you consider that the room that we are in began on this planet about 3.5 billion years ago. If we want to understand what it is to be human, we also have to understand what it means to be alive and what that means in terms of our responsibilities. We tend to take a very parochial view of our own humanity and of life and of learning. All life learns. Viruses learn, dandelions learn. They do it differently than human beings do in a number of ways. They don't learn as individuals, they learn as a species system. That's why it's so difficult to control AIDS, because the AIDS virus, the causal agent, is extraordinarily adaptive. And it requires at least 3 antiviral drugs to keep it in check, and then we can't be certain we've actually killed it. So we can't make AIDS go away in any guaranteed fashion. We can suppress the symptoms by keeping the virus from multiplying. But the virus is so adaptive in its own life systems that it will learn how to cope with the antivirals that we put into the body. If you think about learning as the basic adaptive processes of life and stop and think about the language we use, and if you remember, this is an element of doing work in human learning ecology, we do a lot of semantic inquiry. So we look into the origin of words. Why would we do that? Because words are just marks that we put on things because we find them So important, we want to remark on them again later. They're remarkable in some way. So if you look at the origin of words, the etymology of words, you can learn a lot about human beings were thinking when that word first appeared. So that word adapt comes from the Latin ad, to, aptara, fit, to fit. What are you fitting? You're fitting capacity to challenge within a particular niche and circumstance. All life does that. All life is trying to figure out the difference between right and wrong. What's good, what's bad, what works, what doesn't work. It's not unique to human beings, and we could learn a lot if we would simply pay attention to the life around us. If you think about how more sophisticated individual life forms, not in terms of their species system, because nature plays this neat trick, the more sophisticated the animal, the more they're able to learn from experience, the less rapid they are at genetic adaptations. So there's a kind of a balance. And when we imagine ourselves as being at the top of the food chain and the most sophisticated animals, remembering that we can be taken out by simple viruses in the same way that the strongest eagle will be brought down by a simple virus, and that we will all be eaten by bacteria at some point in our lives. That's part of what it means to be alive. It's important to stop and think when we're trying to understand what it means to be a human being and when this whole process started. A very important fact that helps to extend our understanding out right away. Fundamental, we're all going to die. We're all part of something much bigger. It's not only Christ who died so that others might live, we all die so that others might live. We've constructed our lives and our civilization currently in such a way that we try to ignore that fact. For reasons that will become clear shortly, I hope, we have tried to push back the connections between individual human beings and the larger life forces or the rest of the species. It fits in with the modern religion of consumer capitalism, corporatism, where the most important things we do to orient ourselves and what we think progress in life is acquiring more stuff. And we try to make ourselves happy by acquiring more stuff. We can only keep that going if people are willing to stay in soul-destroying jobs in order to produce the stuff that other people will buy. And the only way we can keep them in soul-destroying jobs is to ensure that they're in so much debt they can't afford to leave. So we see these cycles of orienting stories. We heard some talk this morning about stories. The fundamental fact is that all intelligence works on the basis of a story. You can't orient yourself to the world without a story about what's going on, what is it you're trying to achieve, so the levels of purpose you are carrying in that particular situation, what your personal responsibilities are, what the social, cultural, ecological co-responsibility dynamics are. When you look at the links between those various components, which are required for all animals who are now individually, they have enough intelligence to orient themselves in the world. All animals work on the basis of stories, so do human beings. And it's quite striking that we have come to a point in history where we have scientists studying this leadership, and they come with the idea, my God, leaders use stories. All intelligence uses stories. And we're just coming around to that now. It tells us something about the very limited conceptions we have about leadership and about intelligence and how it actually works. But I want to come back to something very basic about learning at the higher levels of sophistication in the life form. And that is our capacity to learn from experience. Experience shapes what we become. So if you raise a wolf at home as a family pet, tend it, feed it, train it not to bite the postman or eat the neighbor's poodle, that wolf will have a very different set of capacities than a wolf that's raised in the wild, in a pack. So environments make a difference. And we can symbolize that difference by thinking about the pack of capacities, understanding, orienting stories that that wolf will carry as a result of being raised at home as a family pet, as opposed to what capacities that wolf would have if it was raised somewhere else. And recognize that every human being, all higher life forms, have a pack of capacities. And our challenge is to try to figure out how those capacities develop, where they come from, and how adaptive they are. A critical part of our problem as human beings is that our capacities, we think about human beings, a little pack of powers, come from a number of different sources. Some of the powers are in there because of our genetic programming. Human beings are small troop primates, hunter-gatherers, and most of our existence on this planet was spent in small troop formations with hunting and gathering, and our genetic predispositions all were shaped in that period of time. You cannot understand politics, marketing, leadership, or your relationship with your family and your spouse unless you understand something about small troop primate behavior and the kinds of priorities that we have as small troop primates. But we are also shaped by the institutions and society and culturation process. This story is very rich, and it's something that would be worth exploring in some detail in your own reading or explorations elsewhere. But a critical factor, I want to underline it here, when I stop and think about what I'm about to say, human beings are domesticated animals. Human beings are domesticated animals. The means of our domestication is culture and institutions. And we have a huge problem today because there are a lot of us, and most human beings are factory farmed human beings, which means that our way of understanding ourselves, the way we take stock of ourselves and our situation, is shaped by the institutions we've been through, our socialization, our education, our work experiences, which essentially keep us in the farm. We have very little capacity to think outside that frame of reference. So if you saw the movie The Matrix, that metaphor of inside the matrix and outside the matrix, or you've read Plato and you know about the in the cave metaphor, we do not see reality inside the matrix. And much of what we experience in the world today around social media, media of any type, and our education does nothing to get us out of the cave. In fact, it's around the very strong hunger we have for relationships inside the cave because or inside the matrix or inside the factory farm, because the experiences we have there are existentially unfulfilling. Addictions, suicide, depression, these are not medical problems, they're existential problems. They're existential problems that occur because we've created societies that do almost nothing to enhance the human spirit. We keep ourselves busy, we fill up the empty spaces in our lives with things that are not terribly significant, and it creates wonderful marketing possibilities for folks who can now come and promise to make you feel much better about the emptiness in your own life if you would just buy these things or take this course or sign up for a whole series of personal coaching sessions. I wish we had a longer by a fireside someplace, but I want to illustrate something I hope was an image that will stay with you. One of the challenges we have as human beings is that our capacity to understand the world is very limited. But we can put labels on things. We can recognize things. We can use things. This column of water with the blue water at the bottom, the clear water at the top, is a metaphor for levels of understanding. At the top, we have conventional levels of understanding where we know what things are, we know how to use them, we have no idea how they work. So if you think about your DVD player, you think about your car, your computer, you know, you can use them. Do you have any sense of how they work? No. But that also means you can't fix them, and you certainly can't build them. In order to do diagnostics and design or effective prediction and control, you have to have an understanding at this symbolic deep blue water level. This is a level of understanding where you can capture the causal architecture structures of whatever it is you're working with. That gives you the capacity for prediction and control, diagnostics, and design. We've only learned how to do this well for very many things in the last century and a bit. And it's been a huge struggle, because one of the problems is that ignorance does not announce itself, and that people who are thinking about the world at this level are convinced that their understanding is correct, that the way we verify our knowledge, our orienting stories, our values, is such that it doesn't have to have any connection at all with how the world actually works. And the problem is that we're not fighting a struggle where we're clearly engaged in a battle with evil or ignorance. We're engaged in a battle where everybody thinks they're right and they're convinced of it, and that we have to figure out how to proceed from there in such a way that we can help people to understand the advantage of actually understanding ourselves, the world, and how it works. And in order to do that, we have to draw on the broad story of humanity. If you were a visitor from another planet and you really wanted to understand human beings, how would you do that? Would you go to some marketer? Would you go to some psychologist someplace to do that? They might give you a little bit of information. But what you would very probably do would be to replicate Jane Goodall's studies of chimps. But you do it with people. And you do it over centuries. And if you had the luxury, you'd do it over millennia. Let's look at what human beings actually do, what they're capable of. We're not going to understand human beings by looking at brain function. I guarantee you that. I've spent a lot of time poking electrodes into brains and doing EEGs and other things. We can find neat clinical stuff, but we will not understand who we are, where we came from, where we're going, and what our potential is by looking at brain or any other organ. We can learn where we're going, what we are, by looking at the human spirit, what we're capable of. And we have the evidence in history. Once we figured out how to identify those underpinning patterns, which is essentially the structure of wisdom, how we create our imagination, conscience, and meaning-making capabilities. And I have the last thing to share with you. Our imagination, our conscience, and meaning-making capabilities, all those things you know you have, you are structuring through your life engagements. You can become an intellectual hunter. We refer to the difference between garbage bears, intellectual garbage bears, which is a problem. Schools create intellectual garbage bears. You feed them, they become dependent on those food supplies. You want to move forward in your own life journey? You want to understand how we're going to move forward to humanity 3.0? You have to learn how to become an intellectual hunter and how to identify those parts of culture that will teach you the lessons of wisdom, of the human spirit, of life and possibilities. It was a great privilege to be with you here today. I feel like the time has zipped past and I haven't yet got the get off the stage, here comes the hook sign, but I'm sure it's coming directly. So thank you very much.